Chapter 13 of The Adopting of Rosa Marie by Carol Watson Rankin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A Heroine's Come Down. Mabel, with the janitor and 4 pursuing firemen at her reckless heels, had made a bold dash through the long corridor that led to Miss Bonner's room. Owing to a strong upward draft, there was surprisingly little smoke in the corridor, and none at all in Miss Bonner's distant corner. Still hotly pursued, Mabel, who had the advantage of knowing exactly whither she was bound, darted down the narrow aisle, reached into her desk, and, unselfishly passing by sundry dearly loved treasures of her own, seized the fat brown purse. Such joy to find it when so many of the desks had been stripped of their contents! She was none too soon, for the next moment the janitor's hands had closed upon her, and, plump as she was, the sturdy fellow easily carried her out of the room, although Mabel protested crossly that she would much rather walk. In this uncomfortable fashion they reached the corridor. "Not that way! Not that way!" shouted the firemen, pointing toward a glowing, spreading patch on the ceiling of the main hall. "It's breaking through. You can't reach the door. It's not safe at that end." "Down to the basement!" shouted the janitor, nodding toward a narrow doorway, through which the men promptly vanished. Then, seemingly a new thought assailed the janitor. "Open door number 12," he shouted after the men. Then, hurriedly pushing up a sliding door at the safest end of the hall and murmuring, "Quicker, this way," the janitor unceremoniously lifted Mabel and dropped her down the big dust chute. What a place for a heroine! In spite of her surprise, Mabel felt deeply mortified. It was humiliating enough for a would-be rescuer to be rescued, but to be dropped down a horrid, stuffy, dusty chute, and to land with a queer, springy thud on a pile of sliding stuff, the contents of a dozen or more wastebaskets and the result of innumerable sweepings, was worse. In a very few seconds the hasty janitor had opened the lower door of the chute and, with the firemen standing by, was calmly hauling her out by her feet. Oh, she could never tell them that part of it. And then, as if that were not bad enough, that inconsiderate janitor seized her by the elbow and hurried her right into the coal bin, forced her to march over 80 tons of dusty, black, sliding coal, and finally compelled her to crawl, yes, crawl, out of a small basement window on the safest side of the building. The only explanation that the rescuer vouchsafed was the gruff statement that the fire was "more to the other end," and that shortcuts saved time. Mabel tried to tell him what she thought about it, but the janitor seemed too excited to listen. Of course, by this time, the Bennetts, the cottagers, the firemen, the janitor's wife, and most of the bystanders were in a perfectly dreadful state of mind, for the coal hole window was not on their side of the building. Mabel was glad of that, so none of her friends witnessed her exit. The cottagers, in particular, were clutching each other and fairly quaking with fear, when a familiar voice behind them panted breathlessly, "I saved it, girls!" Jean, Marjory, and Betty wheeled as one girl. It was certainly Mabel's voice. The shape and the size were Mabel's, but the color! "Oh!" cried Jean in a horrified tone. "Are you burned? Are you all burned up to a crisp?" But thoughtful Betty, after one searching look to make certain that it really was Mabel, had not stopped to ask questions nor to hear them answered. She remembered that the Bennetts were still anxious concerning their missing daughter, and straightway flew to relieve their minds. "She's safe! Mabel's safe!" she shouted, running to the Bennetts, to Mr. Black, to the Tuckers, to all Mabel's friends, and completely forgetting her own usual shyness. "Yes, she's all safe. No, not burned, just scorched, I guess." Then everybody crowded around Mabel. Mrs. Bennett was about to kiss her, but desisted just in time. "Mabel," she cried, as Jean had done, "are you burned?" "No," mumbled Mabel, indignantly. "I'm not even singed. I just came out through the coal hole, but you needn't tell. That horrid janitor dragged me out over a whole mountain of coal." "Thank heaven!" breathed Mrs. Bennett. "Huh!" snorted Mabel. "That's a mighty queer thing to thank heaven for, when it was only last night that I had a perfectly good bath. That's the meanest janitor—" "Where is he?" demanded Dr. Bennett eagerly. "I must thank him." "Yes," said Mrs. Bennett, "I must thank him, too." "And I," said Dr. Tucker, "should like to shake hands with him." And would you believe it? Not a soul had a word of praise for Mabel's bravery. Not a person commended her for saving that precious purse. Instead, the local paper devoted a whole column to lauding the prompt action of that sickening janitor. Dr. Bennett gave him a splendid gold watch. The school board recommended him for a Carnegie medal, all because of the dust chute. "Don't let me hear any more," Dr. Bennett said that night, "about that miserable $2.47. I'd rather give you $247 than to have you take such risks." "Yes, sir," rejoined Mabel, meekly. "But you didn't say anything like that the day before yesterday when I asked for 3 more cents to make it an even 2.50. I must say I don't understand grown folks." "Mabel, you go. Go take that bath, and when you're clean enough to kiss, come back and say good night." "Yes, sir," sighed Mabel, "but I do wish I could raise 3 more cents." Dr. Bennett fished 2 quarters and 3 pennies from his pocket and handed them to Mabel. "There," said he, "you have an even $3, but I hope you won't consider it necessary to rescue them in case of any more fires." Fortunately, there were no more fires, but the original one made up for this lack by lasting for an astonishing length of time. For 7 days the school building continued to burn in a safe but expensive manner, for the 80 tons of coal over which Mabel had walked so unwillingly had caught fire late in the afternoon and had burned steadily until entirely reduced to ashes. It was a strange, uncanny sight after dark to see the mighty ruin still lighted by a fitful glare within. Only the 4 walls, the bare outer shell of the huge structure, remained. You see, all the rest had been wood and steam pipes. Every splinter of wood was gone, but the pipes, and there seemed to be miles of them, were twisted like mighty serpents. They filled the cellar and seemed fairly to writhe in the scarlet glow. It made one think of dragons and volcanoes and things like that, and caused creepy feelings in one's spine. Even the dust chute was gone. Mabel was glad of that. She hated to think of the janitor proudly pointing it out to visitors and saying, "I once dropped a girl down there." End of A Heroine's Come Down.